My name is Maxim, and I am not suicidal. For personal safety reasons I won't share my last name or the last names of any other people in my testimony. I'm in my 60s, but I am in good health, always have been, with no underlying medical issues. I am not insane or mentally unstable. The Soviet authorities wanted to quietly make me disappear. I was just a nobody scientist after all. But I had already known about their cover-up plans before I even came into meeting with them. I had to lie during the interrogations and pretend I didn't know anything. That there was an accident that left them in ruins with no survivors except mine. A fuel tank explosion, as I insisted with a wink. I didn't mention the papers or anything about other research facilities. I think they caught on that I was willing to do anything to stay alive, and let me go. Maybe they felt pity for me, I don't know. But I managed to be released, given some honorary award, a slap on the shoulder and a measly compensation, but that's not the truth, or the full story. I'm not sure if this is where I should be sharing this. No news corporation or journalist will agree to interview me. I haven't received any replies from anyone else I've come forward to. But that I have to come forward somewhere, anywhere they'll believe me. The events I will soon recall happened over 4 decades ago, but they still bear on my conscience nearly every day. I used to have daily nightmares. I had to be put on pills. But I had to stay silent. If I said anything to anyone I'd be locked in the loony bin. Who would believe me anyways? My own mother didn't. I bet none of you will either after I give you my testimony. Captain Dmitri was the commander on base of our little Soviet-run research outpost in Antarctica. He was still foreboding in his old age, with his white, but full head of hair shaved into a buzzcut. A former colonel in the Red Army who had fought in the Eastern Front against the Finnish, receiving several medals and distinguishing himself as a capable leader. At the age of 60 he was forcefully transferred from active military service to work as station commander for our facility. Nobody knows what for, but there's rumors that he had gotten himself tangled into something he shouldn't have. How else does one end up being banished to the farthest corner of the globe? He should consider himself lucky. If the Soviets could have, they would have banished him to the moon via Sputnik. Or just quietly made him disappear, like they tried to do with me. He was very professional, but did things the casual, laid-back sort of way when possible. I think he preferred to just take it easy and get himself drunk in his office on most days. Today, however, was not most days. He was visibly unnerved as he stood in front of us in the Commons area. We may be at war with the West. Captain Dmitri unexpectedly exclaimed. I remember it clearly. We all exchanged uneasy looks. Some swore under their breath and others began to pray despite their ardent atheism. It didn't help that Captain Dmitri's voice almost cracked at his own announcement. I knew they would start it. Those damn pigs! Cried out Anton, one of the maintenance workers, while throwing his gloves on the ground in a fit. Are you sure, Captain? Why hasn't anyone relayed the declaration of war to us? And how come we haven't been attacked by anything? Abram began to reason. He was the psychiatrist here, a Jewish guy from Minsk. Comrade Nikita cut off the captain and spoke first. We haven't had any contact with any other bases for several days. Maybe it's not because of the weather, but because they've been destroyed. Maybe we just got lucky or something, I don't know, he said as he rubbed his forehead, deep in some thought. Nikita was the comms engineer at our station. Yesterday, he had received several strange, distorted SOS messages from an unknown station in English. Expectedly, when he tried to get through, no reply came, as it was the beginning of winter. Several major blizzards and geostorms had rolled in, shunning any communication with the outside world. The eeriest part was when he and Sergeant Igor calculated the source of the messages. The coordinates appeared in an empty spot on the map. No known research facilities or sites were located anywhere near there. They figured it was a distress call from a foreign expedition which had gotten stranded or lost. The weather was treacherous the entire rest of the day and no one was able to leave until the next morning to investigate, around 6 o'clock today. As soon as the winds had softened to acceptable levels, Sergeant Igor, the squad leader of the defense guard here, along with his co-pilot, Specialist Gunter, got in our helicopter to go to the location of the coordinates where this call had come from. They went with Comrade Tomas. Because he was a younger nerdy guy from the Estonian SSR, he spoke pretty good English and would function as a translator. The flight was about 3 hours from base. However, when they had reached the coordinates, they found nothing at first. But upon closer inspection, some sort of entrance to an underground facility, along with a helicopter pad and some fuel storage tanks were uncovered. After circling a few times, they decided not to land on their own, and they headed back here to share the news, but that's not all. Around 7:15, another call came in. This time Private Alexander was at the comms, and he swiftly answered. It was the closest Soviet station, about 3 hours flight from us. Interestingly, this station, which I won't name, formed a triangle between our station and the unmarked facility. Although this station was about a half an hour flight closer to the unmarked facility than ours. I don't know the exact words he heard on the radio, but as he recalled the gist was the Americans are attacking. I don't know what's going on. Something is wrong with them. I can hear them. I hear them in the hall. No other messages came, and the radio conveniently returned to static. The captain immediately placed the facility on high alert, but didn't tell us why until now. When the reconnaissance flight returned at about 1300 hours, they were immediately informed of the call from the neighboring facility. In turn they have now informed us of the situation. The status of the neighboring Soviet facility cannot be confirmed at this moment, as the reconnaissance flight won't return before the nightfall winds begin. However, Sergeant Igor is planning another flight mission to make a ground investigation that will be leaving first thing tomorrow. Captain Dmitri explained. As far as I can surmise, we may be at war. So we will remain on high alert until further confirmation. Are there any signs of it going hot? I asked nervously. Everybody suddenly turned to the geologist, Gennady, as he began to speak. If there were any unusually large or nuclear explosions, especially like that of a nuclear holocaust, I would have picked them up with my seismology equipment. Everyone held their breath, but I haven't gotten any unusual readings that would suggest a hot war. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Sergeant Igor interrupted our moment of relief. Then how do you explain these SOS signals? How can someone mistakenly assume Americans are attacking them? I agree with Sergeant Igor's analysis. I don't see any other reasonable explanation, Captain Dmitri said. A general unease and tension returned to us as we chewed our hands at the confusion of the whole situation. Just then Private Ivan ran into the room. Sergeant, I need to report an urgent update on our situation, Sergeant. He stated. Yeah, go ahead. Sergeant Igor said dismissively. The post at the control tower has spotted an unauthorized vehicle quickly approaching from 2 o'clock northeast. Private Ivan relayed, everybody out of my sight, now. Private, you come with me to the control tower. Sergeant Igor barked. Everybody scrambled out of the commons area. I, along with Comrade Levi, raced towards the end of the facility where we quickly suited up woolen coats, trench coats, and fur hats and stepped outside to get a peek of this vehicle. About 20 minutes later, a yellow snow tractor, NATO by the looks of it, pulled up to the facility. Comrade Levi and I, as well as a few others now, stood around various buildings, observing from the side to see what would happen next. As soon as the snow tractor got near the entrance of the base, Sergeant Igor and his squad raised their weapons, and began ordering for the occupants to step out of the vehicle. Do you think they're armed? Comrade Levi asked me. I don't know. I only see one though, maybe the rest are hiding in the back. I replied. A single driver stepped out of the snow tractor. It was a woman. She seemed very poorly dressed for the weather. No gloves, hat, or even a parka. Underneath her sweater she had some sort of white lab coat. But even from a distance and in such conditions she was obviously beautiful. She had brown hair tied in a bun behind her, and her face was almost piercingly angular. But with a youthful complexion, the rest of the soldiers quickly inspected the snow tractor, making sure no other passengers were stowed in the back. Next thing I saw, the sergeant motioned for her to come closer. But she hardly had taken 2 steps before collapsing unconscious into the snow. Sergeant Igor waved his AK over and yelled something I didn't hear, and a few minutes later Specialist Gunter and Private Alexander came out with the base doctor. They put her on a stretcher and she was taken to the doctor for treatment. She didn't appear to have any signs of injury, so he ordered for her to be warmed up and put somewhere to rest until she awakens from her coma. We decided to put her with Anna, a Jewish nurse from Minsk. Usually they wouldn't allow Soviet women to come to Antarctica, but she had some sort of connection to Abram that got her the job. Maybe they went to the same synagogue or something. I don't trust you Mongoloids to be around an unconscious lady, she told us sternly, taking the poor damsel into her room. She herself, to be honest, was quite haggy looking and overweight, but that didn't stop several of the guys here from trying to hit on her. So I couldn't blame her for her concerns. I guess it gets pretty lonely at the loneliest place on earth. Meanwhile, Captain Dmitri called for us to meet up once more in the commons area. There, Sergeant Igor cleared his throat and started making an announcement. "Comrade Nikita," he called out, motioning towards him. "Attempt to make any contact with Vostok Station, and any other bases in or around Antarctica, regardless of nationality. I will take 3 more of you and attempt to make a ground investigation and see if we can uncover any more information tomorrow. If that woman wakes up, alert me immediately. Keep a close eye on her, Anna. Until then I want you to keep everyone dispersed to their rooms until I return." He finished. He called out Private Alexander, one of his squad members. "Comrade Bogdan, a trusty Romanian worker, and me. I want you 3 to come with me for this. Gather what you need, we're leaving in 30 minutes. Sergeant Igor barked at us and then marched off to his office. After getting some chow, I went through the cafeteria lounge into the 2-story dorm building to prepare myself for tomorrow's mission. On my way there I bumped into Private Ivan. He looked distressed. His usually stoic demeanor was one of fear. "Hey, Ivan, you alright?" I asked. "I don't know, Max. My wife lives in St. Petersburg. If the whole WWII thing is true." He trailed off, nervously playing with the wedding ring on his finger. Not knowing what else to do, I put a hand on his shoulder and gave him a nod in solidarity before stepping into my room. We were all worried about our families back home. The next morning the 6 of us, Sergeant Igor, Specialist Gunter, Private Alexander, Tomas, Bogdan and I, departed towards the neighboring Soviet base. On the helicopter flight to the American base, me and Private Alexander nervously talked about our home and families. We were both from Ukraine. He was from Kiev and I was from a small village in eastern Ukraine. My official job is a materials and design analyst. I test out the durability of various materials in sub-zero conditions and other variables. In the army I was a combat engineer, which gave me good knowledge with base design and infrastructure layout, as well as knowledge of explosives, which is why the sergeant wanted to take me along. Anyways, it was almost a miracle I was chosen to come here. I was young, I wasn't from a big city, didn't go to a major university, didn't have any important connections. I was only even considered for my application because my father was an outstanding hero of the Soviet Union for his service in World War II. But somehow I actually made it. The pay and benefits were a lot higher than anything I could have gotten in the mainland. And the experience would be an amazing career start for me wherever I decided to go after this. Although, if the rumors of WWI are true, it won't matter anyways. Suddenly Private Alexander paused our conversation and began to stare out the chopper windows. "Good Lord, Max, do you see that?" He waved for me to look out the front window. I glanced outside towards the frozen wasteland, seeing what he was gazing at. Good grace, what the hell happened? I blurted out in shock. In the distance I saw the Soviet camp, or more like what was left of it. The air in the chopper suddenly changed, as if a sudden weight was placed on each of us. We landed nearby on a raised helicopter pad and formed a formation as we began to search for clues as to what happened. However, it became obvious that the camp was totally abandoned. The power had long gone out, and the entire base was frozen over. I gathered a few samples of various burnt materials and did a quick analysis looking for explosives residue. It didn't look like any single explosion went off, but several arson events in succession. The ruins weren't burnt evenly, nor were there craters from air missiles or incendiary bombs marking the area that would imply an aerial bombing strike. "Hey Sarge, take a look at this," Specialist Gunter called out, pointing towards something. We all scuffled over towards him to see what he had found. In front of us were the frozen remains of two people. They were badly burned, but it was clear they were wearing Western-style clothing. "You think they might have done this?" I asked. "Well, it would be better than WWII. I found the bombed remains of what appears to be a NATO helicopter on the other side of the camp. Maybe they had some sort of conflict or accident." Sergeant Igor commented. "But what would make them do this?" Bogdan asked. We nervously sunk into our parkas and trench coats and stared around the area. I felt uneasy, as if someone could jump out and attack us at any minute. Sergeant Igor finally broke the silence. "Let's load these bodies in the helicopter and split into groups of 2 to clear the rest of the base," he commanded. We split into groups of 2 and cleared several buildings in search of anything useful. We located the remains of another body, this one so badly burned we were unable to identify to what side it belonged to, which I helped Private Alexander carry to the helicopter. I returned to combing the base looking for details, checking half-burnt rooms and labs, but nothing seemed out of place or indicative of any sort of explanation. Just then, as I rounded a corner to the other side of the base, I saw it. A literal pile of bodies, maybe 4 or 5 lay frozen in a heap in the corner of the cafeteria. What the? Alexander stumbled back a foot. The bodies were partially burned, and seemed to melt into an amalgamation of flesh. I put a hand over my mouth, and my gaze avoidantly fell to the floor. In front of me lay a Soviet researcher, his hand desperately gripping the handle of a flamethrower stowed on his back. Frozen splotches of blood mixed with frost littered the floor around us. What was he planning to do? I gently prodded at his arm with my foot. Suddenly I flipped around to the sound of crunching glass behind me. I instinctively raised the pickaxe in my hand to defend myself. The door slammed open and Bogdan and Tomas rushed through the door. "We need you to take a look at this," Bogdan stated while panting in between breaths. Tomas had a scared expression on his face. Just then they caught a glimpse of the display behind me. They just stared out, sweat pouring off their foreheads despite the bitter cold. Bogdan gulped. "The sergeant wants you two to see something," he said without taking his eyes off the spectacle. Private Alexander and I shot each other a worried look before running after them towards the way they came from. Dashing inside a half-burnt building, I got a look at what everyone was standing around. It was a frozen and charred skeleton of a man against the remains of a wall. But it was just not right. His body seemed mutilated or distorted, especially his head and skull. Attached to his face and chest was what appeared to be some charred appendage. Or crab-like thing, I wasn't even sure. "Is that from melting in the fire?" Private Alexander asked tentatively. I just stared with my mouth open, feeling a wave of nausea rush over me. "No dude, what the hell? Look at it, it doesn't look like it's part of him. His arms are stuck to it like he's trying to rip it off," Bogdan said while poking the back of his pickaxe at it. "Comrade Bogdan, don't be an idiot and stop touching it," demanded Sergeant Igor. "How are we going to bring it back then?" Bogdan protested angrily. Sergeant Igor turned red as if he was about to chew him out before letting out a sigh of defeat. "All right, we'll take it with us too," he said, flagging Bogdan and Gunter to carry it out. "You think this is the work of aliens?" asked Tomas in a nervous voice. Before Tomas could reply, Sergeant Igor began shouting at him, "Damn it, this will be all classified as soon as I report it to the major. I don't want to hear a single thing about this from you or anyone. Including whatever theories you might have until we know what's going on." He shot me a glance as well, and my words caught in my mouth. But his eyes betrayed his own uneasiness even through his goggles. We decided to leave the pile of bodies as they were, unable to separate them into individual ones to carry out, and only took the other bodies that were recovered for autopsy. The tension was at an all-time high as we began to fly towards the unmarked outpost where we received the first SOS calls from. The entire flight there was silent. Nobody was looking forward to seeing what was waiting for us there. We landed at the site, and after a quick examination of all the above-ground objects, mainly a set of fuel tanks and a few small tool sheds and air vents, the entrance itself was a discrete concrete building with no windows. The only entrance was a large garage door that was fully open, an uncharacteristically sight for something that should have been sealed off from unwanted visitors. "Hey, I think these might be stairs," Tomas shouted, pointing towards the marked doorway with a staircase sign. Sergeant Igor grabbed the keys from the elevator and turned them into the door latch. The handle let out a click and we swung open the double doors, leading to a stairway. The air inside was instantly different. It was several degrees warmer than the outside air, and had a vague warehouse smell to it. Everything was dark except for a set of red emergency lights leading downwards. Sergeant Igor led the charge down, attaching a flashlight to his AK to light the way. I similarly pulled out mine and flicked it down. We made our way down several floors. I lost track of how many we passed. Each landing had an attached metal door to the elevator shaft. Finally we reached the bottom, where a set of bomb-proof heavy-duty doors guarded the entrance. "They just left them open?" Private Alexander asked, yanking at the door left ajar. They slowly pulled open with a loud creak, revealing a wide corridor into what appeared to be the actual base. "I don't like this at all. A secret NATO facility under the ice?" Sergeant Igor grunted. The corridor led us into what appeared to be a canteen. Most of the tables and chairs were strangely overturned, and an eerie dust hung in the air. I shoved a table aside with a loud screech, and moved up to the food line. Trays of vegetables and appetizers and main courses lined the counter as if it was a normal day. But something was wrong. Where are all the people? Researchers? Guards? Anybody? I soon got my answer. Alexander kicked open a door with a thud in the adjacent hall. I heard him instantly retch. I hobbled over to see what he was looking at. Inside the room lay the bodies of what appeared to be 4 scientists in white lab coats. A revolver sat in the palm of one of them. PSSHT. What in the world is this? Sergeant Igor scoffed. Nobody had any words to say. They continued breaking down doors into various rooms while I stood, unable to take my eyes off the scene. Just then something caught my eye as I glanced my beam of light around the room. In the fingers of one of the researchers a manila envelope was partially obscured by his lab coat. I looked around before quickly bending down and tugging it. I opened it up, revealing a set of documents written in English. I quickly shoved them into my undercoat and stepped out into the corridor. Following the rest of the group, Sergeant Igor busted open another door, revealing a room full of vials and sample jars. Several jars and containers full of strange-looking globs and homunculi lined walls. Shelf after shelf of these, ranging in size from house mice to ones the size of a dog. I shined my flashlight at it and carefully picked one up to examine it, but as soon as I lifted it I realized I had made a mistake. The outside seemed to be coated in some slippery substance, and it clattered to the floor, the glass breaking into shards as its contents spilled around me. I began to cough as the room filled with the scent of formaldehyde. What the hell are they doing with all this? Tomas reeled back, plugging his nostrils. The sergeant shot me a look of irritation at my recklessness and I shrunk away from the shelves. I don't like this at all. Whatever the Americans are up to here is certainly illegal. We need to return here tomorrow to photograph and take evidence of everything," he stated. The remaining rooms had minimal objects of interest, mostly other storage rooms with chemicals, supplies, and lab equipment. Some rooms were in havoc, with appliances and lab supplies strewn about the floor. Other rooms were locked. We assumed they were personal quarters by their layout. At the end of the set of rooms a set of locked double doors stood partially jammed shut. A streak of blood scored across the right one, which was partially ajar, but somehow warped from some sort of blunt force trauma, jamming it open at only a few inches. Tomas shined his flashlight above the doorway, where a yellow biohazard warning sign marked the entrance. Sergeant Igor and Alexander took turns trying to pry open or kick open the doors, but they stood firm without budging. "Geez man, what are these doors made of?" Alexander said, wiping his forehead with his palm. Sergeant Igor sighed, checking the time on his wristwatch. "It's already past 1500 hours. We're just going to pack up and get out of here. We can return tomorrow with more supplies. I don't want to stay here until nightfall." We promptly made our way back to the surface and into the helicopter, where Gunter was waiting for us. "What did you find?" he asked nervously. "Nothing good. The UN will have a field day with this." Sergeant Igor shuffled past him into the captain's seat. I looked back at the body stored in the back of the chopper. Maybe it was just my nerves, but they seemed to be just in a different position than before. I brushed it off and chose to sit further to the other end of the chopper. A few hours later we were back at camp, stealthily unloading the now melting bodies from the military helicopter into the morgue so they could rewarm. We asked Leonid, the electrician, to turn on special heating in the room so they can rewarm for later inspection. Sergeant Igor threatened us into silence until the doctor does an autopsy on the remains. On the way out he padlocked the door and snatched the key with him so no one goes into the room until then. We fanned out to our rooms, but a few minutes later Captain Dmitri buzzed for us to assemble in the central cafeteria. 20 minutes later everyone was standing around in the cafeteria waiting for the captain to give his announcement. "You got any answers for us? Are we at war or not?" one of the scientists, Gennady, asked. "Yeah, tell us what you saw." Anton started. "All right, look, I think as far our current analysis goes, we're not sure." Captain Dmitri stated, "Sergeant Igor, summarize to us what your expedition uncovered." He motioned for him to begin his report. "All right, thank you all for your patience here. I'm going to be short and quick with this. Based on my own and Comrade Maxim's analysis, the damage done to the station was most likely not military inflicted from any kind of aerial attack, but rather a self-sabotage or possible ground conflict involving some sort of accident. Furthermore, we recovered several materials and specimens that we will examine shortly. I can't say anything more, but as soon as that woman wakes up we'll interrogate her and likely have more answers. Until then I will dismiss all of you to your dorms. Get a good night's rest." He completed his statement and let us go. I noticed he purposely left out any mention of what we found at the unmarked NATO facility. "Oh, and by the way," Sergeant Igor began while readjusting his fur hat, "I want the 5 of you that came with me to help me move the bodies from the morgue storage into the operating room for autopsy." He pursed his lips as he waited for everyone else to leave the common area and return to their rooms. As I already stated before, I don't want anyone else to know about what we found. I told them the least amount of information to calm them down for now, but I need you 5 to be the ones helping me with this for now. You, having witnessed everything I have, are now aware of classified information. Be careful with your tongues. A few minutes later we were on the opposite side of the building to the common area as we were moving the bodies to the operating room. Captain Dmitri, and the base doctor, Mikhail, joined us to help carry the last body, as he would be the one doing the autopsies anyways. Alexander and I picked up one of the bodies wrapped in a black body bag, walking backwards at the front, going across the hall from one room to the other. Splush! What the? I whipped my head around as a splotch of black and red goo fell on the ground in the operating room ahead of me. Bogdan and Tomas had somehow managed to rip their body bag while carrying it. Ugh! That's disgusting, Bogdan said as I stepped around him with Alexander, carrying our body bag and dropping it on one of the tables. Tomas grimaced as he shook his gloves and stared down at his splashed boots. "You f***ing morons," snapped Sergeant Igor. "Clean this mess up, now." He barked at us. We all quickly scurried to clean up the rapidly spreading puddle of flesh, grabbing mops, rags and towels. I began to grab a few chunks of scarred flesh with my gloves and throw them into a metal bucket with the other parts. Just then, the freaking fire alarm went off. "What the hell is this?" Sergeant Igor groaned under his breath. "All right, everybody outside. Finish cleaning up and let's go," he ordered. I carefully threw off my bloody surgical gloves onto the operating table and rushed out the door, looking around at the blaring emergency lights and siren above. After running to the parlor and grabbing our coats, we swarmed outside into the piercing night air. "Sergeant!" a voice yelled from a distance. I turned to see Private Boris and Anna the nurse running towards us, as well as some of the other base workers coming out of the building looking puzzled. "What happened, Private? Did you pull that alarm?" Sergeant Igor barked at Private Boris. "Sergeant, it's the woman. She got out somehow. I went to check to see if she was awake yet, and the door was open, and she was just gone," he cried out in between gasps of air. "How the hell did that happen?" Sergeant Igor turned to Anna. "Didn't you lock your room before leaving to help us?" he shouted at her. She blushed nervously. I don't know. I swear I locked it before leaving. Maybe I forgot. It was only 20 minutes. She was still unconscious when I left," she stammered out in response. "Well, maybe she was faking it and just waiting for you to leave her door unlocked so she can escape," he angrily scoffed. "Stupid woman," he muttered under his breath. Specialist Gunter began speaking. "Listen, Sarge, she couldn't have gotten far. In this weather, she's gotta be hiding in the base somewhere. Let's gather everybody and just have us search for her," he suggested. "All right. You're right. It was a good idea to pull the alarm as well. We need everybody to be aware. She could be dangerous," Sergeant admitted. "Tell everybody you see to get in groups of 2 and search for her. Have somebody guard the vehicle so she doesn't try to run." Private Alexander and I nodded to each other and then ran inside to one of the opposite detached buildings and began clearing the rooms to look for this woman. "She's probably just unarmed and scared," he muttered. "I'd be scared too if I thought I was being kidnapped by Americans," he joked. Luckily, it didn't take long to locate her. We heard someone yell from one of the nearby rooms about how they found her. We bolted to the room where we heard the call. Inside the lab room, Nikita the comms engineer and Leonid the electrician stood cautiously in front of the woman. They were trying to corner her in the far right end of the room. She was clearly freaked out and held what appeared to be some sort of metal rod or something. Nikita was desperately trying to calm her down, saying something in a foreign language I wasn't able to understand. She started saying something back, but I didn't understand that either. Boots squeaked in the doorway as Carl the fuel engineer, and Felix, one of the scientists, both from East Germany, filed into the room and began to join us in trying to calm down this damsel. She was wide-eyed and terrified, desperately swinging the rod in her hand at anyone who got too close. Just then Private Alexander pulled out something from his pocket. It was some sort of plasticky, futuristic-looking device. "What's that?" I asked, anxiously moving around to the other side of the room to corner the woman. "It's a type of electroshock weapon. I found it at the American base in one of the rooms we searched. I've heard of them used by Americans, but I've never seen one. I had Leo here look at it real quick and see if it still works," he yelled, giving a nod at Comrade Leonid. "Okay, so, what is it going to do?" I asked. "You'll see now." He stepped closer and aimed it at the woman. Releasing the trigger, 2 small harpoon probes shot out and stuck to her side, releasing a high-voltage jolt of electricity into her. She suddenly dropped the metal rod she was holding and seized up, slumping backwards against some equipment on a table. Private Alexander released the trigger and stopped the flow of current. But she only continued shaking. And shook even harder than before. "She's going to die. Kaput. Carl grimaced, putting his hand over his mouth. Dude, what did you do to her? I blurted out without thinking. No, I think she's having a seizure. We need to get the doctor. Nikita demanded, turning to leap over a counter towards the exit. No, 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 it's Private Alexander began to defend himself, but suddenly her spasms petered out as the sound of tearing flesh overtook them. Are you seeing this? Nikita paused, gaping at her. I took a step closer to peer over the table she was slumped behind to see what he was staring at. Without warning, a fleshy tentacle ripped through and off her arm, extending it forward, followed by her second arm like some sort of fleshy vine capped with needly teeth. "Whoah," said Carl as we began to back up, stumbling backwards over a chair. I gasped in shock. Her torso suddenly snapped and started elongating in a sickening squelch. Oh woof. She let out a sudden roar that sounded like it came straight from hell, almost like a cacophony of dozens of voices and screams overlaid into one inhuman bellow. What the FK, I'm getting the hell out of here. Felix exclaimed as he turned to run out the door, but before he could even reach the doorway, a flailing tentacle whipped around, effortlessly piercing him in the back of his neck. His hands shot up as he fell down instantly, his neck snapped and spurting a spray of blood. Leonid grabbed his hair and let out a moan of fear, reeling away from her. Nikita shoved a rolling table toward her. As the woman, or whatever the thing was now, lurched forward and slammed into it towards him. It heaved itself onto the table as Private Alexander had already shoved the stun gun to me and pulled out his AK-74, quickly loading it and taking aim. Several of its appendages were whipping around in the air trying to grab onto something. Lab equipment, test tubes, and containers were shoved off the shelves and crashed onto the floor around us. Papa 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 pop. My ears rang loudly from the gunshots, deafening all the noise around me. Private Alexander had unloaded an entire magazine into it, barely affecting it to our dismay. It roared again in anger, moving towards him. What the hell is this thing? Carl screamed as he dropped to the floor, avoiding a probing tendril. Thinking quickly, I turned the current to maximum and pressed the trigger of the stun gun again, realizing the thing was still connected to the wires. It suddenly caught over itself and spasmed, as if something was pressing on it from the inside. It hardly resembled a human now, with its distorted features and mutilated appendages. Immediately after, it exploded in a hiss, and I instinctively ducked down behind an island counter as chunks of its flesh shot across the room. Several phlegmy globs flew into Private Alexander's face as he shrieked back in terror, swatting them off him. But instead they almost instantly stuck to his arm and began to conjoin themselves to his hand and fingers. I slowly stood up, unsure of what to do. Nikita wasted no time and had already bolted out the door. Carl was on his tail and barreled out as well. Private Alexander groaned and wailed in terror, now on the ground thrashing about, desperately scratching at his hands and face. All around the room pieces of flesh were wiggling around, some were growing appendages. I decided I wasn't going to hang around to see what would happen next and began running for the exit. Leonid was already there, having tripped over the body of Felix, stumbling his way out the door. A fleshy thing with crab-like legs suddenly ran up along the corner of the wall and volleyed off of it at my face. I quickly grabbed a metal tray off the counter and spun it around, slamming it into the creature before it could grapple onto me. I body slammed into the double doors, falling to the other side of the hall. I spun around and looked up to see Private Boris and Private Ivan running towards me. Bomb it. Just bomb it. The guns don't work. I urgently yelled. We heard. Private Boris declared. Without hesitation he pulled out 2 grenades from his sides, quickly pulling the pins and lobbying them into the room as Private Ivan held the doors open. We all pulled back as far as we could before dash. THFBOM, 2 explosions rocked the laboratory building, knocking us down and sending a rain of dust from the ceiling and shattered glass all around us. My ears rang so loudly I couldn't hear anything. I picked myself up to my feet and heaved my dinner in front of me while grasping the wall. What the hell just happened? Was I dreaming? What was that thing? I didn't have time to process any of this as Ivan shoved me forward and we ran out of the building. outside the cold air hit me like a brick, sobering me up quickly as I looked back at the now burning laboratory room in total shock. A few minutes later several crew members ran over to extinguish the fire with fire extinguishers. For a few minutes I just stood there, praying and thanking God that I wasn't the one left in that room. I suddenly remembered that Private Alexander and Felix had been in that room when the grenades went off, and a wave of guilt washed over me. I pounded the ice under me for a bit before slumping down in the snow as a blast of frost slapped at my face.